Tūtahi te rangatira tēnā koe nau I whakatau mai a tātou I roto I tēnei kaupapa. Nau hoki he tuku atu he karake he inoi mō tātou. Kei a koe te mana o te whenua kia whakawātea te ara mō tātou kua tai mai ai ki tēnei huahua whare. Nō reira, tēnā koe, tēnā tātou katoa. Well, first of all, Community Research Services, the Māori caucus there, thank you for the opportunity to spend another day in this great building. We're here really to talk about what's outcomes for whānau. And to do that, really, we've got to come back here in 2037 when there is a generation ahead of us. Because whānau are one of the few institutions that are concerned with the past, the present and the future. Our inspiration comes from the past, from the people that preceded us in this journey. Our determination comes from the struggles that we face today, and our hope comes from future generations. So, Katarina, that's the request. If you could organise a meeting for 2037 so that we can get a better picture of what's happened in a generation. It takes a generation. That's what we need to see. Those of you who, it's really hard to say what it'll be like in 2037. Think back 25 years ago, no ATM machines. How did we get by? A text message was a passage from the Bible. So in those 25 years, we've seen changes that would have been absolutely impossible to predict. It'll be the same in 25 years' time. The one thing, there are some things you can be fairly sure about. Those of you who are now in your 20s and 30s, despite all your efforts not to, you'll look just like your parents. And those of you who are now in your 40s and 50s will be coming to the meeting in 2037 to talk about what it was like back in the day. And the rest of us will probably send our apologies. So, whānau is about generations, and it's about continuity, the past. We don't want to live in the past, but we want to learn from the past. And we don't want to get so bombarded with problems in the present that we can't see tomorrow. And we don't want to just dream about tomorrow, we want to actually plan for it. And that's what Whānau Ora is about. It's about planning for the future generations. This is a headline from the Dominion Post last week. They had an editorial, and this was the heading for the editorial, Whānau Ora, does it make a difference? The article that followed bore no relationship to the title, to the headline. But it's a good question, because it's a question if we don't answer, then we ought not to, if we can't demonstrate that Whānau Ora does make a difference, then it's something that we might need to reconsider. So it's a good question to ask. It's just that the Dominion Post wasn't quite sure how to answer it or how to approach it. Community research, I hope, have a better understanding of how this question might be answered. But that's the question that we're faced today and that you people in particular are here to address. How do you know whether Whānau Ora will make a difference or not? The Minister's really covered this much better than I. But a few points about Whānau Ora. First of all, it's not about health. It's not about social welfare. It's not about corrections. It's not about truancy. It's part of a wide agenda for Māori and Pacific development. So it's linked into the Māori world. It's linked into Pacific communities. That's the first point about it. That's the context. And as Whānau Ora unfolds, it'll be seen as a very critical part of Māori development in its widest possible sense. The other point is that it's built around economic, social, cultural and environmental dimensions. It's got all of those things in it. Very few programs have all of those things. Whānau Ora does. The third point is that we focus, as providers will know, on two things. We've got to deal with the disadvantages that exist and the impacts that come from disadvantages. We can't ignore them. If it's rheumatic fever, we've got to address that. If it's truancy, we've got to address that. If it's violence, we've got to address that. We've got to do all those things. But we shouldn't be blinded by those things, because what we really have to do as well is to make whānau strong and resilient and able to manage themselves. So there's two tasks that providers have. Sometimes those tasks aren't easy to see because you get so deeply involved in one side, fixing up problems, that we can't see that there's an opportunity to build strength. But they are the two things. So they are the two main things. And to do with measurement, we probably have got to look at two sorts of measurements. A reduction in adversity, but more importantly, an increase in whānau achievement. So there's two scales that we're looking at here. Have we been able to reduce adverse incidents? Have we been able to achieve success? Well, just a little bit of history on whānau. It's 2.5 years old, which is fairly early days. But from what we've been able to see so far, it's moving in a strong direction. The 33 providers that we now have as part of the Whānau Ora program, Whānau Ora policy, 33 providers doing some amazing things. Just coming together has been quite amazing. Well, particularly when there's a 100-year division between some of the groups who have been able to come together. Previously, we were working in competition with each other to a large extent. That was a product of the contracting environment that we're in. We've now been able to say that here's a chance for us to come together. Takes a while to work out what everyone's going to do in the new collective, but that's been a major achievement to be able to do that. An achievement for providers, more importantly, I think, an achievement for the whānau that they're working with. Because the whānau they're working with don't want a fragmented, bitsy system to work with. They want something that's coherent and makes sense and can address the whānau as a whole. Quite a lot of crisis management has been sort of the focus now. We've got to have a stronger emphasis, I think, on building capability. That'll be the next phase. And then beyond that, we need to be able to look at, are we making a difference? What are the outcomes that Whānau Ora has achieved? These, what the Minister mentioned, are the goals of Whānau Ora. Someone said, oh, you can drive a bus through those. They're fairly broad. They are very high-level goals. And for each goal, we need to say, well, what would tell us, for example, that whānau are self-managing? What are the sort of things that would tell us that? Well, it might be that they've got a decent house to live in, or that they own a house. Or it might be that they've got a way of making decisions. Not all whānau have a way of making decisions. By the way, when we're talking about this, don't think too much about your own whānau, you get discouraged. But but not all whānau have a way of making decisions. They leave it up to the Maori Land Court to make decisions on their behalf. That shouldn't happen. A self-managing whānau is a whānau that can make decisions and can do it in an open way and can do it because they have a leadership capacity to do it. So they would be sorts of indications that whānau are self-managing. Do whānau have healthy lifestyles? What is it that you would look there? Would you look how do whānau participate in sport and exercise or leisure? What is these sort of arrangements they have for eating? Is it on the run meals? Do they have an organised system for meals? That would be an indication of healthy lifestyles. What part does alcohol play within the whānau? Is it a controlled? Do they have a kawa, for example, for eating, and a kawa for drinking? They would be indications that whānau are living in a healthy lifestyle. So for each of these very broad outcome goals, need to think about what are the things that tell us that we're making progress towards it. And that's what we're talking about, moving towards a goal, not getting to the goal in day one. There's our hope for the future down here. We're in good hands, I think. So coming on to outcome measurement, this for New Zealand programs, this is a fairly new idea, really, that we should measure the effect of what we do. Most of the time, we've been more concerned with how many people we see, how many interventions we do, and how much did it cost. The idea that we should also be interested in what we do bring any benefits. That's a pretty new idea. Whānau Ora has been upfront about this from the very beginning, we've always said that this is a program that should make a difference to whānau. We want to look at what the outcomes are. So in some ways, we've committed to that. That's attracted quite a lot of criticism from people who say, well, how do you know what a good outcome is? And that's something we're working towards. That's why this seminar is so important. That's why the website will be so important, so that we can get a better idea of the progress. But we are committed to the idea that this is a program that should be judged on its outcomes, on what it achieves. As I said, there are many programs that have been launched over the years that we've no idea whether they make a difference or not. And many of the health programs, many of the social welfare programs, no one asks, did it make a difference? How many immunisations did you do? How many well-child checks did you do? How many people with diabetes did you manage? Never the question of, did your intervention actually make a difference? So Whānau Ora is a bit different in that way. We're saying we want to talk about the difference we make, not about the huge amount of energy that we expend. It will be a lot of energy, but you know, you guys are all young, so that's not a problem. You've got miles of energy. The other thing is the question about outcome, just to need to distinguish a little bit between satisfaction surveys and outcome surveys. You can be really satisfied with the service you're getting, but it may not make that much difference. You can feel that in the health surveys, when I was working in a medical context, we very occasionally would run patient surveys, and we'd get some very flattering remarks back that the doctor was wonderful, spoke to me in a very caring manner, had a great bedside manner. Unfortunately, I didn't get any better, but I was satisfied with the service. So satisfaction is not the same as a good result. Sometimes it's used as a proxy, but it's not the same really as a good result. The other thing is, if you're doing a satisfaction survey and you've got someone leaning over your shoulder watching you write it, you'll probably write down that it's a great service and that everything's going well. The other measurement that we're good at is measuring the status of individuals. So that most knowledge we have about whānau comes from measuring the individuals in a whānau, not from measuring the whānau as a whole. That's a relatively new territory, and that's why the work you do is going to be important, because you're going to be talking not just about did the single person in the whānau do well, but did the whānau as a whole do well? And how do you measure whether the whānau as a whole is doing well? So that's new territory for many people, and you're the pioneers really in trying to look at the whānau as a whole and seeing whether the whānau has shifted as a group. And then the point I measured before, the two sorts of indicators, things that measure adverse incidents, offending, rheumatic fever, truancy, all of those things you know every day, and the things that indicate achievement. They're not the same. Probably need to have both in mind. The other thing is measuring the impact of Whānau Ora as opposed to the outcomes of Whānau Ora. The impact of Whānau Ora goes beyond the outcomes from the people you're dealing with. Because Whānau Ora is not just a way of delivering a service. Whānau Ora is a model and a philosophy and an approach to building capability. And the impact of it should go well beyond the families you are dealing with, to embrace communities, to have an impact on iwi. It'll lead to an attitudinal change, so the Dominion Post might take quite a different view when it's talking about Whānau Ora, when it's talking about whānau, be as interested and as pleased about whānau success as about whānau disappointments. And it's also shaping a model of practice that will go well beyond Whānau Ora providers. So need also just to think about the wider impact of Whānau Ora, which is not just about the whānau the providers are dealing with. And of course, increasingly there's evidence that iwi want to play a part in this. They want to contribute to Whānau Ora. They may not want to contribute as providers of services, but there are many other ways in which iwi can contribute, because when you think about it, iwi actually are made up of whānau. And you might expect that as iwi get more and more focused on the tasks of the next generation, that they will be looking for ways in which they can contribute to whānau development. So they are the wider impacts of whānau ora, probably not what we're talking about in the narrow sense today, but the different from the outcomes of the people that you're dealing with. The other thing is there's a big outcome story and a little one. We do need to know the success stories, and we don't hear about those, but we also need to know the not so successful stories and the really bad stories. There will be some. We need to know them so we can learn from them. If we don't know about those stories, if we're not upfront about those stories, we never get a chance to change our practice so that we can avoid that into the future. So the whole story is an important one. Personal anecdotes are really helpful. Also need some quantifiable data. And so we're going to be looking not only at the narratives that people tell us, but can we quantify the changes that have occurred? In the end, that's what our funders will be looking for. Now, these are some of the other questions that get asked, and I don't know the answers to any of them, but I'm sure you do. What should we be measuring? What is it that we actually want to measure? Who is supposed to be benefiting from whānau ora? And how do you measure difference? What do we mean by difference? Remember the question, is whānau ora making a difference? What do we mean by difference? And what causes the difference? Because sometimes what we do, we get great people change in a wonderful way, and we think it's got something to do with what we've done. I had a great experience with that, working as a psychiatrist some years ago. Had a woman patient who had chronic depression, severe depression. And I tried psychotherapy, which was, how do you feel? She said, oh, it's pretty obvious how I feel. But tried a number of antidepressants. Didn't seem to be working. Got on to a new antidepressant, one of the new type. She came back 2 weeks later, smile on her face, looked happy, energy in her step. And I thought to myself, at last I have found the right medication. I said, is that medication bothering you? She said, Doctor, I haven't taken any. And I said, well, you look so well. She said, yes, my husband left. So sometimes it's difficult. We know there's a difference. The cause of the difference is more complicated. If it's a good difference, we assume we've made the difference. If it's a bad difference, we think it's someone else caused it. And then when we're talking about measuring whānau, are we talking about just looking at the outcomes for whānau who've been involved in the Whānau Ora program, or should we be concerned about all of the whānau in a region? If you want to get good results, only work with whānau who are doing wonderful things. And that means a lot of whānau are left out of it. So if we want a comprehensive view of whānau, we've probably got to look beyond the caseload, if you use that word, that we've got, and talk about whānau within a region. Now, if we're looking at quantifying any model, the traditional way of doing it in New Zealand is to look at input measures. We look at what we do, how much work we do, how many hours we spend, how many home visits we make, so on. They're all input measures. We're really good at that because that's what your contracts have required you to report on in the past. The numbers, the volumes, and then the actual outputs that you achieve. Yes, I did 25 immunisations. I visited 23 schools. We haven't gone to, generally, to look at the results of the activities, but that's what we're talking about here, is the results, not the amount of energy, not the great work that you've done, not the hours you've spent, but the results you've achieved. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the wider impacts that might arise from people you work with who are not necessarily part of Whānau Ora, but will benefit from the Whānau Ora approach. Now, who's supposed to be benefiting from Whānau Ora? Who do we measure? The obvious one is that whānau who are part of Whānau Ora program, they're the people you want to focus on. Or should you look at all whānau, regardless of whether they're part of the program or not? I think providers will have a primary obligation to look at the whānau that they are dealing with to know whether they're making a difference. But others who are interested in what the welfare of the wider region will want to know what's the difference for whānau in our region. And then do you look at the individuals who make up the whānau and then work out how the whānau is doing? Or do you have another sort of measure that looks at the whānau as a whole? Maybe got to do both. But they are different things. The whānau is more than A plus B plus C plus D. The whānau has got its own way of measuring its success and its achievements. And these are the two ways that we commonly look at to know whether we're making a difference. Whether we've decreased the incidence. So if you're decreasing the number of adverse incidents, you could say that's making a difference. Or do you measure it by increasing achievements? The approach we've generally taken in New Zealand is the first one. We look at decreasing adverse incidents. So that some people would say the success of whānau ora will be a reduction in the prevalence of diabetes. That would be the first option, measuring a decrease in adverse incidents. A narrow measure, because it doesn't look at the capability and the achievements that have been developed as well. Just looking at the increase in whānau achievement. Next weekend, for example, there's a great event in Napier called Anga Mua Whānau. That would be an increase in whānau achievement. If you've got whānau who are entering into Anga Mua Whānau, a hugely important achievement, because they will have spent a year, well, in the case of my son, 6 weeks, they'll have spent some time anyway getting ready for it, training, losing weight, getting muscular strength, and the whānau will be involved. That's a major achievement. And that would be one measure of whānau achievement, that this whānau has committed itself to participate in Anga Mua Whānau. It's measurable and quantifiable. So there are marae participation, a whānau that commits itself to be involved in the marae, is a measurable outcome. So that's what I mean by whānau achievements. We're more familiar with whānau incidents, adverse incidents. And the attainment of whānau ora goals, this is what I mentioned earlier, need to get some indicators that tell us whether whānau are self-managing, whether they have economic security, and whether they generate wealth. Some people say that we shouldn't be concerned with whānau generating wealth. There is no virtue in poverty. It's not a great thing to have. We want the opposite. We're looking at whānau who can learn to be wealthy and who want to be wealthy. And we want whānau to be cohesive. As I mentioned earlier, we don't want the Māori Land Court to sort out every whānau problem. Amazingly, distance is no longer a problem to cohesion. If you think of Māori whānau all around the world, certainly all through New Zealand, the one whānau scattered throughout this country, but a lot of them, I'm told, in the mines in Australia, come up for air now and then, but they're scattered, and you might think that that's a problem to maintain contact. It's not as big a problem as it was in the 1950s and 60s, when whānau left rural areas to live in town and lost communication. There is technology now that enables you to keep in touch with each other no matter where you live. So that I went to a tangi 2 years ago, and it was being live broadcast to whānau who were in Australia and whānau who were in London who couldn't make it back home. They were part of it. So it is possible, despite distance. Sometimes it's easier, actually, to have a whānau meeting where you can't see the eyes rolling up and, and the body language, and just get on with the business. So distance is no longer a barrier to cohesiveness within whānau. The other thing to look at is has this whānau got a decision-making capacity? That's probably the major issue that whānau ora is about, is whānau being able to provide strong leadership with a decision-making capacity. They make a decision, well-informed. So to make a decision, you've got to be well-informed, but they make the decision, and they do it with a clear mind, with agreement, with the participation of all their members and their wider whānau as well. But that would be an indicator of a whānau that's managing itself well. They've got a way of making decisions. Not all whānau do, they allow one problem to go on for generation after generation. A little thing that started with Auntie 3 generations ago is perpetuated forever. So there's no way of getting around it. But a strong whānau, resilient whānau, is a whānau who can make a decision and can move on. Now, the government may not want to know exactly the same thing that providers want to know. And the government is funding quite a lot of whānau ora, not all of it. We heard yesterday there's a lot of whānau ora programs occurring that are not contributed by the government at all, contributed by land trusts of one sort or another. But the whānau ora fund, as we know it, is a government fund. The government will want different undertakings, I expect, than from the ones that whānau might want. They probably are more interested in whether whānau ora providers get better results than other providers. That'll be one thing that they're particularly interested in. They'll want to know whether the change that whānau have is sustainable or whether it's kind of a one-off feel-good thing. And they will want to know probably whether it's made a difference in a whole region or not. So the need to have in mind that when we're looking at whānau ora providers, there are different audiences that do it. I talked about the attribution of results. It's complicated, and we just can't assume that an input that you make is going to achieve a particular result or whether an outcome can be attributed to the work you've done or contributed to something else. Quite a lot of the work you've done, will not lead to good results because there is a wider operating environment that is beyond your control. For example, just using the health as an example, most of the things that lead to good health are outside the domain of the health sector. Good education, good housing, good income, they are the things that determine good health. The health sector doesn't have an opportunity to change those. The same way that whānau ora providers may not always be able to change the context within which whānau are living. Another way of looking at it is to set some targets and say whether we've met the targets or not. And there are two sorts of ways of doing that. We can say that let's set some targets which look at reducing adverse incidents. These are just examples, by the way. So you say, okay, by 2015, make it 2037 if that seems too close. 2015, there'll be a 30% reduction in domestic violence, or a 50% reduction in truancy, or a reduction in rheumatic fever. Whatever the target is that you want, that's a priority, you set the target. And you set it against a timeline. The other way of doing it is to set some achievement targets and to say by 2015, 60% of whānau will be financially literate. That is, they will have been to programs in financial literacy, will understand the credit card, and will understand banking, and will understand saving, and will understand household budgeting. That would be an example of financial literacy. It's a critical literacy that's needed for successful whānau. You might say that 80% of whānau will be succeeding in programs of learning. Some of those will be in schools, some of them won't be in schools, there'll be other sorts of learning programs. 40% of whānau might be estate literate, that is, they know where their land is. We talk about ourselves as tangata whenua. If you take the whenua away, you're only half there. And yet quite a lot of whānau don't know actually where their land connection is. They know that they've got a huge amount of land because their grandmother said to them, "You see all those hills over there, boy? They belong to you." Didn't add that there are 500 other people that they also belong to, or what the title was, what the number of the title was. So there's quite a lot of estates illiteracy where whānau actually don't know the link to their land, and yet if we talk about being tangata whenua, that's a really critical link. So that would be an example of achievement, that the whānau you're dealing with know exactly where their land is, know the title number to it, know how it's being organised, how it's being run, and know how they might contribute to its ongoing development. 60% of whānau might be fluent Māori speakers. That would be an achievement. That's measurable. 80% of whānau might have broadband. I mean, in the world ahead of us, it's going to be critical to have good information technology in every home. And whānau, if they're going to make wise decisions, need to be well informed. And that'll be a way of informing whānau in the future. So setting targets is something to consider. The good thing about setting targets, you've got something then to measure. You know what you're aiming at, and you can work out how the progress you're making to get there. May need to alter the timelines, bring them forward or back. What are the advantages of doing all this? Well, for those of you who are providers, it tells you whether the work you're doing is useful or not useful. And if it's not useful, if no one's getting any benefit from it, you need to rethink the whole situation. So it's going to be really important, I think, for providers to know how they're doing. Not how much work they're doing, but how the people they're working with are doing. That's really important. Funders want to know whether they're getting value for money. They want to know whether the $34 million that's being spent on Whānau Ora is paying a dividend. Is it paying off? Whānau want to know as well what the outcomes are, because they want to know whether it's a waste of time, spending time with providers, or whether it's providing a way forward. So they have a critical interest in knowing what the outcomes are. So they might need a different sort of outcome approach. And other agencies outside Whānau Ora will also want to know, because they might want to mimic what you're doing. You are establishing a different form of practice, and that practice will have a huge relevance and be of great interest to your colleagues who are working in other areas. And the other point is that almost certainly you're going to have to do more than one sort of outcome measure, because the sort of outcome measure that whānau might be interested in, they'll want to know whether their plans and aspirations are making progress. It'll be based around their aspirations, and that's a critical way to do it. The government may not be interested in that at all. So there may be more than one approach that is necessary to take. I hope for the future getting tired. So really that's what I wanted to say, but just coming back to the Dominion Post headline, which is a good question. Whānau Ora, does it make a difference? And really just wanted to scope some of the areas that you will know better than I, and that you'll be able to look at as the day goes on, as to how we know whether something is making a difference. What do we measure? What is the difference? Have we got the right time frame for it? And will it satisfy the whānau? Will it be useful to the whānau, useful to providers, and useful to the people who fund Whānau Ora? Kia ora.